The night Marcus Carter was arrested felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Flashing red and blue lights painted his small neighborhood in chaos as officers dragged him out of his home in handcuffs. His mother stood frozen at the doorway, tears streaming down her face, begging them to stop. "He didn't do anything," she cried, but her voice was drowned out by the shouts and sirens. The charge was brutal armed robbery. The clerk at a corner store had been hurt, and with no other suspects, the police zeroed in on Marcus. He was young, poor, and lived in the wrong part of town. That was enough for them. His pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears as they shoved him into the back of the police car. By the time he stood in court weeks later, the damage was already done. Newspapers had painted him as a criminal, neighbors whispered about him, and even his closest friends stopped calling. Sitting in that cold courtroom, Marcus felt like the whole world had already judged him guilty before hearing a single word of truth. The prosecutor stood tall, describing Marcus as a reckless teenager with no future, the kind of boy who thinks rules don't apply to him. Each word cut deeper, burning into Marcus's heart. The judge barely glanced at him, nodding along as if the trial were just a formality. Marcus kept his head lowered, his hands trembling against the wooden table. But deep inside, a spark of determination flickered. He knew the truth. He knew he hadn't committed the crime. And though everyone else believed he was guilty, Marcus promised himself one thing: he wouldn't let this be the end of his story. The first days of the trial felt less like justice and more like a cruel performance. Marcus sat silently at the defense table while the prosecutor painted him as a heartless criminal. Every mistake in his past, late homework, a school fight, even a missed bus fare, was twisted into evidence of a violent character. The courtroom echoed with quiet laughter when the prosecutor sneered, "This boy couldn't even manage high school. How could he possibly manage to stay out of trouble?" Jurors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Even the judge seemed impatient, sighing loudly whenever Marcus's attorney tried to object. At one point, the judge leaned over and said in front of everyone, "You should be grateful we're even giving you a trial, young man. Most like you would have already taken a plea deal." The words stung like a knife. In the gallery, strangers whispered. The third day of trial began like all the others, heavy with tension, stacked against Marcus. The prosecutor spoke confidently, waving documents and pointing at Marcus as though the verdict was already sealed. But then something unexpected happened. As the prosecutor presented surveillance footage, Marcus's attorney, Ms. Rivera, leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing at the grainy video on the screen. She tapped her pen, then suddenly stood. "Your Honor, may we pause?" The judge groaned, clearly annoyed. "What now, Ms. Rivera?" "Play that footage again, slow it down at timestamp 1432. The technician replayed the video. The courtroom leaned closer. On the screen, the so-called Marcus wore a dark hoodie, sprinting from the scene. But under the slow motion, the courtroom atmosphere had completely shifted. Where once there had been smirks and whispers, now there was silence, a heavy, watchful silence. Marcus sat tall, his hands resting calmly on the table, as if he finally belonged in a place that had tried to bury him. The prosecutor's confidence cracked. His voice wavered as he called the next witness, a police officer who had sworn Marcus was the suspect. The officer took the stand, his jaw tight, his eyes darting nervously. Ms. Rivera approached with quiet authority. "Officer, when you arrested Marcus Dawson, did you see a tattoo on his wrist?" The officer hesitated. I don't recall." "Of course you don't," she said sharply. "Because the jury deliberated for hours, but for Marcus, it felt like a lifetime." He sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the silent door through which 12 strangers would decide his future. Every second was a reminder of the humiliation, the laughter, and the cruel words that had nearly broken him. Finally, the jurors filed back in. The room hushed. The foreman stood, a folded slip of paper in his trembling hand. Marcus's heart pounded as the judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The foreman cleared his throat. "On the charge of armed robbery, we find the defendant, Marcus Dawson, not guilty." The words hung in the air before the room erupted. Gasps, whispers, even claps echoed through the courtroom. Marcus closed his eyes, tears burning behind his lids. For the first time, he could breathe. Ms. Rivera squeezed his shoulder. "You're free, Marcus. It's over." Across the room, the prosecutor sat pale and defeated, his arrogance shattered. The judge, once dismissive, avoided Marcus's gaze. And the officer who had testified looked down. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a thoughtful comment. Your support means everything. Television. Subscribe now to Echo Resistance for more powerful stories that open